So we built the most modern brewery in the world. The plant is a 3-building unit, the largest of which is the brew house, occupying about 32,000 square feet. Adjacent to it is the storage and fermentation building. Then the powerhouse, 2 stories high and occupying about 10,000 square feet. And incidentally, using more oil in an hour to fire the burners than is used in the average home in the course of a year. The 3rd unit is the bottling and shipping building, 132,000 square feet. We of Carlings are indeed proud to be a part of the great industrial community of Natick and of Massachusetts and, in fact, New England.
Say, what's brewing around here?
Ale and beer. What else?
Well, can we take a look?
Why, sure. Going up to the 5th floor where the brewing operation begins. The start of the brewing process is automatically controlled on this floor, as you can see from our control panel over here. Malted barley from a receiving station on the roof is dropped down through a duct into the daily brew hopper on the floor below.
Pardon me, but what is malted barley?
Barley grain is sent through a process of steeping, growing, and drying so that it will contain less moisture. Then it is softened and mellowed to develop a flavor and aroma which can be easily taken from it during the brewing process. We have the malted barley in the daily brew hopper on the floor below. From there, it is returned through another duct to the screen and malt mill, where the grain is crushed so that the kernels will be broken open in order that they may be more readily dissolved. From that malt mill, the crushed grain is sent to the ground malt scale hopper on the 3rd floor. The hard ends of the barley, together with the corn grits, are sent to the cereal scale hopper. Then the grains are weighed. Now, working with amounts as large as 600 barrels and even more, accuracy is still very important in order that the taste and the quality may be controlled. And the weight is recorded right here on this floor.
You mentioned barley and corn. That's not the only thing in beer and ale. What about hops, for instance?
Well, yes, of course, there are other ingredients used. Now here, this may be of some help to you. 1 year's brewing operation in this plant amounts to about 835 separate brews. Now that will require 450,000 bushels of malt barley, 450,000 pounds of corn grits, 167,000 pounds of hops, and 3.5 million pounds of other grain derivatives.
Wow.
Here on the 2nd floor are the cereal cooker and the mash tub. Now, it's at this stage that liquid, water, is added. The grains in the cereal scale hopper on the floor above, the corn grits and the hard ends of the malt barley, are dropped into the cereal cooker, where they're cooked for about 2 hours. The ground malt is dropped from the ground malt scale hopper into the mash mix. And this whole process, by the way, is called mashing. When the mash in the cereal cooker is ready, it's pumped into the mash mix where it's added to the crushed malt, the barley, water, and salt. And it's cooked here for about 2 more hours. Now this is all controlled automatically, as you see on this control panel. Time, temperature, a complete record of what's brewing.
Say, could my wife use this for mixing cake batter?
Not unless you were going to be baking a cake for an army. There are almost 1,000 barrels of mash in there. This is the Lauter tun on the mezzanine of the ground floor. This is a filtering process. Here, hot water is sprinkled over the mash, and the circulating blades inside the Lauter tin keep the mash moving so that the liquid can filter through it evenly. And it drains through thousands of tiny little slits at the bottom of the Lauter tun. Now, the mash pulp that remains in there is sold either directly to farmers for fodder for their dairy herds, or it's taken to a kiln dryer, it's dried, and then sold to packing houses for resale to farmers for their herds. And incidentally, it's very valuable in increasing milk production. So you can see that nothing goes to waste. Now, the liquid which results from this process is called the wort, and it is collected in what is called the grant directly below the Lauter tun. The filtering process is controlled right here. Now, let's go down and meet Ed McCann, the chief chemist for Carling's Natick plant.
The function of the quality control laboratories is to maintain product uniformity. This uniformity is attained through the operation and cooperation of our three laboratories. First, let us take the main control lab. Here, the brewing operation is controlled from the initial raw materials right down to the outgoing finished products. In our bacteriology lab, we have a set of procedures so designed to eliminate the possibility of contamination in our product, and also to provide us with the maximum amount of sanitation in our plant. The main function of the bottle shop laboratory is to provide us with the uniformity of our packaged product. Such items as pasteurization temperatures and bottle washing procedures are just a few of the techniques that we have to provide this uniformity.
Now, from the grant, the wort flows through into the brew kettle, where it boils from 1.5 to 2.5 hours. Now, it is here that hops are added at specified times during the boiling. Hi, Frank. Here's a gentleman who can tell us all there is to tell about brewing the brew. He's Frank Rasinger, our brewmaster.
This is the brew kettle, and here the wort, which is beer before fermentation, is sterilized through boiling. Choice hops are added here to produce consistently desirable flavor of Carling's beer and ale.
Now, when the boiling is completed, the wort is drained into the hop jack in the basement, where the hops are strained out. Then, the hot wort is pumped to the cooling system, which is across the room from the brew kettle. Here, the temperature of the wort is dropped from 200 to 50 degrees using water from Lake Cochituate. From here to this machine right here, where the wort is filtered through 30 coated screens to develop that clear amber liquid. Now, from the filter, the wort goes through holding tanks in the basement below to the fermentation tanks in the next building.
How long does this brewing process take?
Well, it starts at about 7 o'clock in the morning. It's completed at about 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon.
Say, you said this cooling system uses the water from Lake Cochituate. Well, what happens after a couple of years? We lose a lake or spoil it for fishing?
Well, all right, let's go find out. We can't have fishermen worried about losing a lake or mothers worried about a water shortage, can we? The famous Natick wells, only 300 yards from the Carling's plant, pump about 6.5 million gallons of water every day. And even in the driest season, the water level in those wells has never been known to drop more than 5 feet. These wells are one of the big reasons why Carling's located in Natick. Because the water is so pure, it needs only to be filtered through charcoal to be used in making beer and ale. Now, Carling's will use less than 1/6 of the water pumped from these wells. And the cooling water, taken from Lake Cochituate, will come from the deepest part of the lake. And after it's used to cool the wort, it will be discharged into the lagoon outside the plant. And then, because it spills over 3 waterfalls, picking up air, and is returned to the lake, well, the fish and the fishermen are the winners, because the water is then better for breeding fish than it ever has been.
So that's your story, huh?
Oh, no, I'm not finished yet. You wouldn't drink the beer in the state we left it.
No?
No, it doesn't even taste like beer. It has to be fermented, polished, and aged.
Polished?
Why, sure. You'll see.
Okay, but let's give my cameras a little more play, eh? What's next?
Fermentation.
Here we go.
Fermentation of the brew is the process of splitting the fermentable sugars into alcohol and carbon dioxide through the use of brewer's yeast. Now, there are 2 processes of fermentation. There is top fermentation, which produces ale, and there is bottom fermentation, which is done in closed tanks, and that produces beer.
Well, tell me, is brewer's yeast any different than the yeast used in making bread?
Well, yes and no. You see, there are about, hundreds of varieties of yeast which are capable of producing fermentation. Now, brewer's yeast is specifically developed for fermenting the wort. Now, by maintaining that special strain, the brewer is assured of a constant flavor and quality in his beer and ale. Right now, we'd like you to meet Mr. Roger Williams, who is the plant engineer here at Carling's Natick Brewery, and he can tell you a great deal more about the difference between beer and ale.
Well, to start with, the differences between beer and ale are in the different proportions of grain used in the brew. Ale, for example, uses more hops, which gives it a deeper flavor. In the mashing in process also, different temperatures and times are used, which give each brew its characteristic flavor. In the storage and fermentation building, the ale is stored and fermented at higher temperatures. This, again, gives it a different characteristic. Speaking of differences, contrary to popular belief, Bock beer is not the dregs of the tanks or vats as we see here. Rather, it is a separate brew made from caramelized and roasted grain. This gives it a deeper, richer flavor than we normally expect in our lighter brews. Porter is to ale what the Bock beer is to beer. Porter being another variety of beverage to please the particular taste.
Thank you, Roger. Now, after fermentation, and that's 7 days for ale and 12 days for beer, the brew is pumped to storage tanks for aging, 4 to 6 weeks at 32 degrees for beer and 40 degrees for ale. Then to the carbonation room, where the carbon dioxide, which was produced during that fermentation process, is forced into the liquid under pressure. After a week's rest in finishing tanks and the final carbonation, the brew is pumped to the government cellars, where flow meters record the number of barrels for tax purposes. And incidentally, the brewing industry pays over $750 million a year in taxes to the United States government. Here in the whirling world of automation, untouched by human hands, the amber liquid is transformed from a government asset into a packaged, palate-pleasing potion that's treated the taste of man for 6,000 years. 4 production lines bottle and package the product. Now here, for instance, 12-ounce bottles are being processed.
Question. You know, there's something I've often wondered about. Why is beer and ale put up in brown glass bottles?
Well, it's not by accident, you can be sure of that. You see, beer and ale, exposed to sunlight or even artificial light for any length of time, undergoes a change that produces a very disagreeable taste and aroma. It's called skunky. You can try it for yourself.
No, I'll take your word for it.
I see what you mean. Let's get back to those 12-ounce bottles. The bottles are picked up in the receiving room, and they're deposited in the soaker washer, where they get 7 caustic washes and rinses. Junior, on Saturday night, never had it so rough. Then, just to make sure, they're brushed inside and out and rinsed again in clear water. From the washer, down the line. And then 1, 2, 3, 400 bottles every minute into the filler and capper. Filled, sealed, and delivered to the hot bath, the pasteurizer where the yeast growth is killed, so that your picnic beer won't explode in the trunk of your car before you get to the picnic. Then out of the pasteurizer like marching men, through the inspection station, sharp eyes looking for impurities in every bottle. Then to the labeling machines, and then ready to ship to fulfill its destiny in the pleasure of good taste and good companion.